Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our quarterly education meeting this evening in November. I want to start off our meeting like we start off every chapter meeting, which is to recite our mission and vision for the Southeast chapter. Our mission of the chapter is to secure the highest quality of care for all critically ill and injured patients in the Southeast region by providing educational and research opportunities as well as promoting multi-professional collaboration. The vision of the chapter is that all critically ill and injured patients in the Southeast region will receive care from the present integrated team of dedicated trained intensivists and critical care specialists, as well as inspire new leaders and providers of critical care in the region. We have some quick announcements here that we'll go through, and then I will introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Lewis Kaplan. But first off, I want to let everybody know about CE instructions. This is a question we always get, so I want to make sure everyone understands. We have a slide here, and you can always take a picture of this slide if you're watching now in the top right-hand corner. And this is a link to our survey and needs to be completed before Tuesday, November 23rd. So complete the survey by Tuesday, November 23rd in order to receive CE credit. And again, this will be one contact hour for tonight. So go ahead and take a picture there and be sure and take your survey after tonight's presentation and complete it before November 23rd, and you will get one contact hour of CE credit. We have an opportunity for our chapter members to participate in our annual business meeting, which is coming up on Thursday, November 19th. Again, we have a picture there. You can take a picture of in the bottom right-hand corner and get a link to join. And our access code and phone number is there for our annual business meeting. And this is, we did not put the time on here, but it is at 12:30 Eastern on November 19th. Spike Out Sepsis Atlanta was a little different this year. We know we weren't able to all get together because of the ongoing pandemic, but we were able to raise over $1,900 for Sepsis Alliance. And because of the money we saved with not getting together, the chapter was able to donate an additional $5,000 to Sepsis Alliance and their work that they do to raise awareness of sepsis as a medical emergency. So excellent work there. We really appreciate all the donations and the continued support that you guys give for Sepsis Alliance. Don't forget, throughout the holiday season, you can also support our chapter through shopping at Amazon Smile. If you go to smile.amazon.com and choose Southeast Chapter Society of Critical Care Medicine as your charity, every purchase you make, Amazon will donate a portion of that purchase to our local chapter. So no additional cost for you. You just use that website and they will donate to us. We also have our mentor-mentee program that we are revamping. If you're interested, you can email Danielle Guy. Her email there is in the bottom left-hand corner, or again, we have a photo you can take there to link you to our website where you can sign up to be a mentor or a mentee. More information on our website for that. Our chapter leadership. We also want to remind everyone that we have our Barbara McLean Contributions to Critical Care Nursing Award nominations. Please send those to communications@sccmse.org. This award recognizes a nurse in the Southeast region who exemplifies the values of SCCM, a model based on collaboration, contribution, evidence-based communication, and collegiality. So again, send your nominations to communications@sccmse.org and more information on our website at sccmse.org. We have member benefits. If you are not a member of the chapter, in order to get your CE credit, you can become a member. It's very cost effective, only $45 a year, and you get 4 CEs per year. And more information again on our website at sccmse.org/membership. We are in the process of planning for 2021 topics and speakers. So if you have any ideas or have a speaker suggestion, you can email our programming chairs, either Doug Smith or Mia Malin, and their emails are here on the screen. Or you could always reach out to us via our website or social media, Twitter or Facebook. Look for our upcoming Twitter chats. Again, you can follow us on Twitter, SCCMSE, and we have an upcoming Twitter Journal Club, which is on December 19th, and the article will be announced in the next coming weeks. We also have a speaking opportunity called our Bite-Sized Lecture Series. If you're interested in a multi-professional presentation and presenting, then you can email Susan Smith for more information on that opportunity. And as always, get a lot of our chapter updates from, again, social media, Twitter, Facebook, and you can also visit our website, sccmse.org. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Kaplan is a critical care surgeon at the University of Pennsylvania in the Division of Trauma, Surgical Critical Care, and Emergency Surgery, and the Section Chief of Surgical Critical Care at Penn's affiliated VA Medical Center. His education included a BA at Franklin and Marshall College and an MD from Rutgers Medical School. This was followed by a surgical residency, Medical College of PA, and a surgical critical care fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh. He's directed ICUs and CCFs in 3 systems. At Yale, he established the first emergency general surgery service, as well as tactical emergency medical services for a regional SWAT team. Dr. Kaplan serves in professional society leadership roles and on multiple editorial boards, including the Journal of Trauma and Acute Care Surgery, Critical Care Medicine, and Surgical Infections. Dr. Kaplan currently serves as the president of the Society of Critical Care Medicine, and we are honored to have him here tonight to speak for us on viral leadership. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kaplan as I swap over our control to his computer.
Well, that was a very kind introduction, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you. I got my start in chapters, as did the immediate prior president, so they are absolutely critical for the success of SCCM. Let's see if I can show my slides to you. Okay, you should see all of that. There we go. Okay, we're going to talk about viral leadership. This was not the year to be president. That's what everyone told me. And yet, this was a very interesting year. So let's talk about some of that. These are my disclosures. None of them are financial in nature. Since I am a VA employee in part, my views are my own. Within the context of a disaster, in particular a pandemic, we'll talk about initial COVID care, later COVID care, what to do with COVID positive and negative patients, and how medical professional organizations impacted all of that. We'll talk a little bit about import and export activities and evolving practices that are related to what we do as a multi-professional organization. You're now looking at a publication from 2018 that purportedly demonstrated how well we were prepared globally for an epidemic. The lighter the color of your space, the more prepared you were supposed to be. Of course, we now know that this was entirely wrong, because this one thing, SARS-CoV-2, laid all of that to waste and highlighted all of our deficiencies. It did, on the other hand, and in particular, across social media, identify for us that we were a global medical community in a way that we had never experienced before. We learned from all of our partners in Italy and Spain and China and the UK. You can go on and name country after country, leveraging what we learned from SARS initial and MERS to try and be prepared for SARS-CoV-2. Let's talk about what that really looked like here. Well, it was kind of like this. It was incoming. We expected to be overwhelmed and inundated with a tremendous impact, and this was really spot on. Early events regarding infection and preparation led to panic. We had far too many patients, and there was a lot of confusion about what we should do, all in the setting of too little equipment, staff, and most importantly, information to guide how we would best take care of patients. You're looking at a graph now displaying from the start of the pandemic in December of 2019 through June 29. June 29 was important because we crested 10 million cases. The bars in yellow are the Americas, and we have continued to outstrip and outpace the rest of the world with cases. March 11th was when the WHO declared this to be a pandemic. and it launched a couple of events here in the US, namely two key leaders. You know both of them, Anthony Fauci and Brett Giroir. And you can see one's in public health management, the other took over supply and testing. These two individuals, more than any others, interface with medical professional organizations around the response to SARS-CoV-2. And they interface with leaders throughout SCCM, but also many other organizations, the ASA, take your pick. They engaged with all of them. This was completely unexpected and unprecedented access to people in positions of leadership within the government. Now, right behind Brett, you can see Jerome Adams, who, of course, as a surgeon, we have our first anesthesiologist as Surgeon General, and then all the elective cases got canceled. So this was just par for the course. The US responses that were spearheaded, of course, were federal and state, and you can see the different agencies, but under state, I also include the public, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. But medical societies were much more nimble, forming partnerships and changing the structure of websites, changing how they presented information in journals, what their leaders did, and most importantly, what you, the volunteers, did. This became very critical as COVID swept through the US. Early on, we had usual care. If you were sick, you went to the ICU. We embraced a philosophy of early mechanical ventilation and intubation, but not so much non-invasive ventilation regarding concerns about aerosolization. If you weren't sick, well, maybe you went to the floor. If you were in a smaller hospital, you only went to the ICU, but we didn't really change our paradigm very much with regard to how we handled patients. This seemed to be a comfortable space for everyone. And yet everyone was uncomfortable. You're looking now at a very early rapid cycle survey, and this is really Ruth Kleinpell's work, and you contribute to this. You can see the breakdown, mostly ICU nurses, but physicians and a whole host of others asking, what are your common concerns? It was really about PPE and therapeutics. And what were you worried about? Did you have enough staff? Did you have enough drills? Did you have telehealth capability? More than half did not. We began to do things that the government could not. We started asking questions so that they could help shape policy. We'd never done this before. Concerns were ranked: masks, staffing, and how long it took to get your COVID-19 test. Our president-elect, Greg Martin, part of your chapter, has really led and revolutionized some of the testing that will be unfolding over the course of the next year. Of course, we had far too many patients. There was no room at the inn. What you did when you had no more licensed ICU beds was you developed novel ICU spaces, acute floors, the PACU, the OR, convention centers, perhaps a hospital ship. All of these were turned into novel ICU spaces. Well, of course, that needed some guidance. Taking SCCM members and putting them in one space and learning from them led to this particular publication, Configuring ICUs in the COVID-19 Era. Now, it may be hard to see on the screen, but one of the pieces here, besides clinical management and physiologic monitoring, is emotional support for staff. This rose as a primary and a key concern, and therefore we devoted resources to doing just that. But when you stand up new spaces, you need more people, and therefore you also needed a way to staff them. And so we leveraged the seasoned PharmD and ICU advanced practice provider, respiratory therapist, and ICU nurse to work as the leaders of pods of other individuals who did not typically work in the same ICU space. Of course, you have to train them. The critical care for non-ICU clinicians training course has been downloaded more than 600,000 times, taking the materials that you, the volunteers, created to teach others how to help you take care of the critically ill and injured. And it looked like this. Perhaps your ICU looked just like this. The pumps were outside of the room, and there's writing on the glass doors. Ethically, that's okay. We ran it through many different ethical organizations. There's always an artist in the group, but this is reality. You don't want the ultrasound machine or the x-ray machine to run over those lines and damage them in any way, shape, or form, so reminders are helpful. This writing on the glass door became important for other teams, especially teams that would normally enter the room, and for family members that weren't there. They could get the daily care plan, they could see it, and it was a source of comfort for all of them. And it was a communication tool that many places had not previously leveraged that was brought to the fore by our membership. Of course, we had to relocate the nurse. Maybe you needed a new power strip. We had to order more workstations on wheels for the docs because, well, the nurses weren't using the ones in the rooms exclusively, and they weren't really located at the nursing station. They were, in fact, where they needed to be, right outside of the room. Now, this led to this particular problem. The fire marshal was not very happy with the space, but I don't see the space as the issue. I see the tired people as the issue. We'll talk about how we imported help for all of those spaces in short order. Some of that importation were ophthalmologists and urologists and vascular surgeons and CRNAs who came to help out in these novel ICUs that were stood up. This became absolutely essential in dealing with the wave of COVID patients. But that required medical professional organizations to interface with hospitals around credentialing so that you could have people working in places where they didn't work before, truly out of medical necessity. At the same time, we protected lots of resources. Right? Visitation was suspended. Families, significant others were kicked out of the hospital, a real challenge to patient and family-centered care. Students of all types, including rotating residents, were not there anymore. The workforce was trimmed, and if you were used to relying on a bevy of consultants that you could call and have show up at the bedside, many of them, unlike you, well, they were at home. And therefore, the typical department depth on which you would rely for new conditions that would crop up often was truncated. Instead, they were brought in by telepresence. Now, we've always known about telecritical care, but we didn't use it so much for consultation. But now we did. In fact, with the technology, you could get a look at that particular skin rash, or they could see the waveform with you with great ease, even if they weren't in a telecritical care bunker. This could happen over their smartphone. Importantly, it allowed the family to see what was happening, even if they didn't have the smells and all of the alarms and bells and whistles that go off within that room in quite the same way. All of that allowed us to spare PPE, which was absolutely in critical supply. It was leveraged for medical education for all of those trainees that were made to stay at home or had to be in a remote site where they could log in to see what was happening. One thing that was important, and this was pushed forth by medical professional organizations, is that you can't have your family discussion in that space where you are covered with PPE. That needs to occur in your office, where visual cues, what you're doing with your eyes and your mouth and the set of your face becomes important, because you can't read it behind a mask and goggles and headgear. It's just impossible, especially if you're thinking about goals of care or end-of-life discussions, a very common event during severe COVID care. And the ICU became transformed. We didn't have elective ORs, and we coined a new term, nosocomophobia, fear of hospitals. That, coupled with a significant reduction in ED visits for typical acute care, took most surgical ICUs and turned them functionally into medical ICUs. In fact, mine often had rotating medical fellows from rheumatology or other disciplines that came to help out as we had an increase in patients and acuity, and we extended our ICU boundaries. This was a very common event. But there were controversies. Aerosol generating procedures. When should you do it? Where should that occur? Only in a negative pressure room? Only in the OR? Exclusively in the ICU room? And should you in fact do that at all until they are better? How much PPE did everyone need? Did the person who was cleaning need to be encased in a Tyvek suit or not? And then, of course, there were early proponents of lots of different therapeutics, some of which have been laid to rest, hydroxychloroquine, Steroids we decided to embrace. Zinc still keeps floating back and forth, as does vitamin C. Antibiotics turned out to be pretty reasonable. And tocilizumab, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. But these all added to uncertainty in a time of crisis. Let's talk for a moment about aerosol generating procedures. We were all concerned about this. Well, in fact, this underrepresented the spray because it really should demonstrate it over in the top of that particular face shield and all across your neck, as we've now learned. So we figured we would encase everyone for safety. This was great, homemade versions, except the FDA decides that the EUA for that, the emergency use authorization, really was inappropriate without concomitant negative pressure for it. So communicating all of those things, if you weren't on the FDA site, became one of the key things that medical professional organizations needed to do. This led to lots and lots of time for people in leadership to spend on TV and in different articles and on social media, communicating these kinds of things in real time. Well, we had these. You're looking at being encased around Ebola, but it really felt like you were in a very old dive suit because everything was heavy and it weighed on you. Of course, you felt better about it, but perhaps what you really wanted was one of these. You'll have to guess which one I really wanted. My son, who was a game design person, wanted the Z2 suit because, well, that shows up in some of his video games. But it was a time when everyone was afraid of contracting the virus and bringing it home. And so more was viewed as better, and yet it was in short supply. Addressing all of those things in terms of supporting production and distribution and information streams, this led us in a leadership capacity, many different organizations, to interface with the central aspects of the government. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But we learned on the fly. We learned about hypoxia phenotypes, and we learned about changes in compliance and how that would impact the way the CAT scans would look. You couldn't rely just on lab data. You had to look at much more than that. And so as we learned the physiology that underpinned different aspects of this particular disease process, we also needed to share that. And we shared it with the public. And the public was great, except it had ups and downs. You are familiar with this. You probably still have the sign outside your institution that says, "Heroes work here." What a wonderful thing. No one celebrated us really before. All the night celebrations, the towns were turned blue. This was absolutely spectacular. There was music that was played for us. There was food that was dropped off. We have food carts around Penn, and many of them would change their hours so that if you were working late, there was food to be had. Donations of pizza in particular would show up in the ICU. This was grand. We even got our own definition. Finally, Merriam-Webster added intensivist. Of course, they did it right next to working from home and nosocomophobia, but at least we now have a definition as intensivist. Everyone else had one. This was glorious. Until we started asking people to wear masks. You are looking at the anti-mask meeting on January 25 of 1919 to protect against the unhealthy mask ordinance. And in 2020, it is the new symbol of tyranny. It is a problem all around, so that you go from one aspect where you are a hero to the other where you are infringing upon people's rights as you ask them to comply with public health measures. Consistent messaging was one of the roles for medical professional organizations and leaders, since there seemed to be not as much consistency with messaging from other aspects of the government. But what happened next? Lots of things. We changed paradigms. Right? We went from dry tubing to humidified and heated wire to avoid obstruction of airways and endotracheal tubes. We went from simple VT prophylaxis to therapeutic anticoagulation, and then modified anticoagulation for others. This is still up in the air and evolving. But all of these practices had to have been shared with members and non-members alike. This was sort of our role of getting this kind of information as we learned more into the public domain. Other things that got there, changes in how we provided care. You're looking at a heat map. darker means more. And if you look at the top, use of non-invasive mechanical ventilation, you can see the US is fairly light, but we were very, very dark with high flow nasal cannula. We've now inverted this. And so that the changes in practice paradigms would need to be communicated so that people had the same expectations when they showed up in the hospital and they didn't think that they were receiving very different or inappropriate care. This was another key role for us. And therefore, the rise of the non-invasive machines from BiPAP to CPAP to in particular helmet CPAP with some high flow nasal cannula thrown in there, whether you did it in an airborne isolation room or not, was viewed sometimes as this kind of machine, but it was particularly helpful in terms of resource allocation and ventilator sparing in particular for those who did not need invasive mechanical ventilation. Positioning non-invasive ventilation as a superiority approach became a key message for those who did not have severe COVID-19 disease. We did learn a few other things. Well, these things were still yours to use a lot. Your N95 that was previously disposable, the eye shield that you now wipe down until it's scratched, and your level 3 mask that allows you to, well, spend a whole week with that particular same coffee aroma if you're a coffee drinker like me. We're not sure about all of this, and there's more data to come, but as it comes, we will certainly share it with you. But leading these kinds of things became challenging because it was different than what everyone had expected. Of course, rapid communication around things that we didn't really want to learn about. Here's from the New England Journal, learning about MIS-C, the COVID-19 related syndrome in children. Everyone was appalled by this, but we asked questions. We heard from members that said, doesn't that occur in adults also? Well, yes, it does. And here it is from the CDC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome in adults. We are not left out from this. And therefore, the unification of information and the harmonization of what we've learned in different age groups also became the purview of organizations such as ours to share. When things of note came forward, we thought remdesivir was fabulous for those with a recovery trajectory. Dexamethasone, great for just about everybody. And prone positioning, truly great for everyone. Right? We've learned since then. We've learned that hydroxychloroquine, early invasive mechanical ventilation, tocilizumab, not as helpful as we'd like. Remdesivir is under assault after the Solidarity trial, and convalescent plasma is a little bit up in the air. It's all related to this data. You're looking at COVID-19 pneumonia, PF ratio 200 to 300. The bang for your buck is in the findings, no difference in progression of disease whether you use the monoclonal antibody or not. So those hopes perhaps were not realized in the way we'd like. This is the latest from convalescent plasma, best standard of care versus convalescent plasma plus best standard of care. No change in neutralizing antibody titers, no change in outcome. But of course, this wasn't controlled for titer, and so that the importance of having this data is that the leadership of organizations are often asked to comment on what this really means. And what does this mean for the future of medical care, and what should I expect at my hospital, and what are the outcomes that remain to be investigated? And so we've been put in positions to speak to members and non-members in a very unprecedented fashion. One of the other things that came up were new care teams. If you're like my hospital, we have prone position therapy teams. In particular, when all the elective ORs were shut down, we asked who does this all the time. Well, it's anesthesia and orthopedics and neurosurgery and vascular surgery and some general surgery. They became leveraged for the routine prone position therapy for those in the ICU. Vascular access done by teams that had transactive memory. They know what the other team member will do because they do it all the time together. And it allowed you to worry about the rest of the patients rather than being tied up with procedures. Now, I know procedures are fun, but at 2 in the morning, if someone else is going to put in the lines, I'm okay with that. Tracheostomy was a huge controversy. And so the supporting teams where there's perhaps someone from acute care surgery and someone from ENT that would do all of the trachs, that became useful because, again, it was a very concentrated experience with a particular toolkit with a select team to minimize exposure. And I must say that palliative care medicine and social work became expert family communicators of information that they didn't normally transmit and didn't normally share, but they spent all of that time without all the PPE in their offices sharing what they learned being on rounds with us. As things progressed and the first surge seemed to abate, we started to have resurgence. Well, we learned about cohorting around injuries in trauma centers. Some people that would come in COVID positive, well, some of them would die, some would discharge, some had a long enough length of stay that they became, in essence, COVID negative. What do we do with them? Some of the COVID negative patients were discharged, but some developed symptoms while they were inpatient, and they became COVID positive. We learned all about how to deal with disposition of patients that were under investigation. So the notion that you could truly cohort and separate patients into different spaces was challenged throughout the entirety of care, and in particular, if your center's like mine is a trauma center, because everyone came in through the same bay all at the same time. As we got back to our usual activities, this impacted how we would cohort patients and how we would staff for them. If you have only one supply closet, but you're on two sides of a fire door, but everyone's using the same place, is it really separate or not? We've learned that it's not really as separate as we'd like. And the systems have adapted. If you are in systems that have more than one healthcare facility, as you prepare for your second, or perhaps in some places your third wave now, some have dedicated one facility to be the COVID care facility, and everyone is transferred there. Others will load balance across them. We're currently doing that in my system, where we have equitable distribution of COVID patients so that no one place is overwhelmed. Instead, we can overwhelm all three places based upon the influx of patients. What we have not had, and yet we have advocated for continually throughout this pandemic, is a dashboard and a national system that allows me to know in my city, in my region, on my seaboard, how many patients are in that hospital, how many beds can they stand up, how many RTs do they have, how many functional ventilators and non-invasive devices, what is the percent change in occupancy from last week to this week or yesterday to today. All of the things that are part of your daily hospital operation could be uploaded into one place using the power of the national laboratories to visually present that in a way that is meaningful for FEMA and the CDC and other organizations to think about how to release things from the secure national stockpile and to where they should be sent. We're not quite there yet, but it's not for lack of trying. On you, we worry about burnout syndrome and what your resilience will be and your longevity in critical care, because the grouping of COVID positive and COVID negative patients, all with an unusual risk while you've been in the hospital throughout all of that, throughout shortages, and for a very long period of time, is worrisome. We are concerned about how best to support you. In particular, with an inconsistent approach that's spread out across the country, and you can see states that had partial lockdown, states that had statewide lockdown at different times and different phases. And so that a lack of consistency is very unsettling. And so the medical professional organizations, and you can see many of them here, in particular in orange, we're a cross-specialty organization. We have people from multiple professions. They had key roles in addressing this. And within the context of the disaster and a pandemic, we redesigned our web pages, we curated content, and we generated new content. Actually, you guys generated a lot of that content. Educational product sharing, this happened because we took it out from behind a paywall. Webinars abounded. Online education, kind of like this, was new and it was everywhere. We changed what was in our journals to make it easy to find. The international linkage using social media that allowed experts and subject matter experts to be exported across virtual platforms occurred with great intensity. So you can see here's one of SCCM pages the Rapid Resource Center. You can pick what topic you need and you can go to it. It has already been curated for you. You don't need to do the searching. We did that. You can see here, this is from Critical Care Medicine, COVID-19 journal articles already identified, ready for access. And we've had this truly within weeks of the start of the pandemic. Of course, we've also tried to make sure that what we are presenting to you has fidelity. We have yet to have to retract anything. This is really Tim Buckman's signature. He's made sure that we have published things that have integrity. The website you can change quickly. The journal, there's some obligate time delay between what comes in and when it goes out. Social media is instantaneous, but it has limited space. So instead, we developed a blog. We'd never had a blog before. So you can see here on our disaster and emergency resource page, latest emergency response articles. There's Greg Martin, SCCM President-elect of Fast Track COVID-19 testing. Well done. It's all there. You can find ethics and resource allocation, telecritical care, requests for volunteers, and member stories. All of this in a blog format. All of it supported by a COVID-19 discussion group. That article that was about how to reconfigure your ICU, posted as a blog, regularly updated. It's not a fixed asset, it's a living document. But SCCM had opportunity. This is March to April. 6 podcasts, 80,000 people. 22 novel journal articles, 125,000. 21 webcasts, many more than usual, 670,000. 116 interview requests, which hit over 2,700 places and was seen by 6.7 billion people. This was never anything that had happened. I can tell you most SCCM presidents have had less than a dozen interview requests, and since the start of the pandemic, I think I'm up over 200 at this point. It is staggering, and we have now been able to lead in that way. I got an email from Newsweek. I figured it was some of my friends that were pranking me. Please write us an opinion piece. I called. No, it was real. You can see we had a national dashboard of digital coronavirus data. That's the Washington Post. We've been able to have lots of things like this, including these different society investigations. You saw the infographic from the first one, but there's a second one with double the number. But all this tells us about members, and we're able to do this rapidly and get lots of information. But most importantly, that doesn't help you take care of patients, but this will. This was stood up as part of the Discovery Research Networks, the virus study. And this is from yesterday. We updated this particular slide. Almost 30,000 hospital admissions, 6,800 ICU admissions, relatively old patients, and you can see these are 23 countries and 274 sites, and more in Latin America are on the way. If you look in the US, you can see perhaps your center on here, 40 states, 225 sites. All of this was stood up with a handful of people asking the question, what can we learn? Well, we can learn this. Who received care? What proportion had high flow nasal cannula or non-invasive ventilation? How long were they there? How did they do? Who got discharged alive? How many people needed ECMO? If they were discharged alive, where did they go? Symptoms, comorbidities, all of these, you will see a whole series of papers coming out from the virus registry. All of this was the brainchild of member volunteers. We import volunteers to help. We import resources. Sometimes we have PPE or ventilators that we can share. We've exported leaders and subject matter experts. Volunteerism is key. And within a pandemic, which is really a disaster, there are your personal priorities and your desire to help. But you have to have a personal safety matrix that addresses self-care, how you'll be taken care of at work, and what the safety plan is for your family. If you don't have one, you need to develop one, and you need to practice it. Of course, we have a resource for that. Fundamental Critical Care Support, resource limited. Many members contributed to this. It was originally designed mostly with a military focus, but that wasn't enough. What you needed down here is travel safety and security for medical personnel, because if you're going to go share all of your training and your education and your skills someplace else, you need to be prepared. So we made that in a very rapid and responsive fashion. And then we exported people. Guidelines, SSC, Surviving Sepsis Campaign, we've done that, but we never did anything with the NIH. We sent them a whole team. The Surgical Infection Society overlap for guidelines was new. CHEST, we had always done things with around resource allocation, but that was updated in fast track fashion. Webinars abounded, some with organizations with whom we had prior relationships, but others like the American College of Emergency Physicians, we had none. Instead, we had 2 webinars. And you can see all of the federal resources where we placed people. This is me meeting with Brett Sherrar. One of us is happy, one of us looks exhausted. My sole discontent is that the green armband really didn't go with any of the rest of the coloration of the things that I was wearing. This was a 2-day adventure thinking about how to ventilate more than one person on one ventilator and how to do it as safely as possible. It led to a number of other things, but we were never invited to go to these places before. Well, what does that leave us? It leaves us with these evolving practices. This is where we are now, over 50 million. You can see the density of cases in the US. Right? There is vast opportunity. This is climbing faster than we had thought. We're up over 100,000 cases a day, with some predicting more than 200,000. In order to prepare for that, we did something new. Rather than those individual webinars, we put 34 different groups together in one space. This was our What's Next conference. We'd never done that before. And importantly, this included organizations in the pre-hospital and outpatient sector, as well as the post-hospital outpatient sector, along with everything else that addresses inpatient care. We'd never done this before, and it was quite the success. One of the things was this guy, Brett Sherrar, who closed it. Anthony Fauci opened it for us. The durable relationships across organizations were not really tied to publications, but they were tied to personal contact and willingness to volunteer and serve. And that's really what shows up here. This is all about deployments from the Public Health Service, but the important panel is the one on the bottom right of your screen. You can see there's an individual holding hands with a small child. It's not his child at all. That simple contact, that caring for one another, that maintains your humility and your humanity, is emblematic of everything that brought you to critical care in the first place. And that needs to be primary in our minds. And Brett really stated that incredibly well. There are questions that we have to answer. Vitamin C, vitamin D, other vitamins, zinc, Pepsid, polyclonal antibodies. You get them all if you're the president, but what is that? What do they do on a routine basis in terms of outcome? We don't know. We think that we know about vitamin C. Maybe you should eat your fruit rather than having it injected, but there are still questions that we're answering, and we have weighted our hopes. We don't really have anything that is directly active against the virus. So instead, we're hoping for prevention with sequential doses of vaccine. We'll see how the Pfizer vaccine works out as opposed to any others. On the forefront, we have lots of things in the acute care sector in terms of keeping people out of the ICU, including lots of opportunities in terms of telehealth for outpatient and ongoing care. We're working on developing novel agents. There was just a monoclonal antibody that was approved under the FDA EUA for use principally in that outpatient setting. Anti-cytokine storm therapeutics and perhaps even adsorption along the same lines that we have for continuous renal replacement therapy, that might work. High antibody titer plasma has yet to be investigated, and a space in which SCCM has a lot of signature post-intensive care syndrome, that's being actively investigated, in particular around symptom persistence, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction. We don't yet know what to do with that, but there's a role for you in investigating things along those lines. This is an article that is great to share and great to read. 10 Things We Learned About COVID. It's from Maurizio Ciccone, the president-elect of the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, that covers everything we know about the virus to diagnostic tests to preparedness. And there is one thing that we know about preparedness, and that is that Tony Fauci is prepared for 60 minutes with an SCCM mask. We sent it to him and he wore it. It was great. And so as a society, it's been hard to lead because we've been apart, and yet at the same time, we've had truly unparalleled opportunity to meet with people like Dr. Fauci, like Dr. Giroir, and a whole host of others. You will find that many of them will be honored within the next SCCM annual meeting that will install Greg Martin as our next president. I will be happy to turn over the Twitter account to him. I will miss the rest of it, but you are now members of an organization that has really come to the fore. It's come to the dinner table and the evening news. And so with that, I will leave you with these conclusions. Crisis response gets to everyone in healthcare, and in a way that federal resources cannot. Medical professional organizations can be nimble and can lead. But we're doing it all together, and we're doing it with a sense that we, in fact, are part of a global medical community that helps other people to care for one another in ways that we had not previously anticipated. And it relies on you and your spirit of volunteerism. And of that, I am most proud. It is part of what helped me find SCCM to be my home. And it all started in a chapter just like yours. So thank you very much. You can send me additional questions past what we have tonight at any of these accounts. And I will thank you for being here this evening, and I am very, very grateful. Thank you. Let's see if I can surrender control.
Sure, or you can leave it. You can leave it right there. That works. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Kaplan. That was a fantastic presentation. I have to say, you know, I'm one of those that has certainly gotten to the burnout phase, I think, as many of us have. But it is nice sometimes to just go back and look at everything we've achieved during these times and how difficult it was and how much we've accomplished. I think we have accomplished so much as a society, and it's nice. It's a little boost in morale for me, I think. Does anyone listening on the line have any questions? We have a few minutes, so please feel free to type them into the type box, or if you can get yourself off mute, we would be happy to hear you. Any questions for Dr. Kaplan? I think Mia may have had one to start us off with. Let's see. Anything, just looking back, anything we think we should have done sooner, or timing wise, just like lessons learned as far as timing of anything?
I think that what we did around the COVID-19 conference of bringing many organizations together all at the same time, I would have liked to have done that earlier instead of doing that later. It's easy to say that in retrospect. I'm not sure how we would have done that, because I think that a lot of the lessons that each of those organizations learned in caring for COVID-19 patients and caring for their members kind of drove that together. It would have been nice to have known that in advance, but we didn't. I will tell you that a number of people, because I've now had the opportunity to be at a couple of different chapters, they've asked me whether I always wanted to be president or whether this was an accident. I can tell you, I had no notion of this. It truly was an accident, and it all was related to being guided by mentors. My particular path started when two of the senior people in the surgery section identified that perhaps we needed a strategic planning chair. It was around the same time that we were articulating the SCCM designation. And so I had to go talk to all these people that were much older than me. I'd read their papers when I was a trainee. They were the surgical gods, if you will, within the critical care space. And I had no idea. In fact, when I was running for council, I was running against one of my dear friends, Christine Taves. She had just finished being the chair of the surgery section. I thought I was the designated loser. In fact, it turned out that I wasn't. A little bit of fortuity. And then when I got reelected, because I was having just a great time, then the notion of, well, maybe I could make it to the executive committee. But it wasn't until then. This was never a plan of mine. I simply like working in critical care. It's cognitively stimulating for me. I'm an intensivist who operates rather than a surgeon who does critical care. That is entirely the fault of being in Pittsburgh, which was a delightful place to learn. So this was not a planned event. I sort of fell into this, and I've been very fortunate and happy that I have.
Wonderful. Yes. We do have a couple questions here. Let's see. Our first question, great talk. Thank you. What is the main challenge for the society in regard to COVID-19 in the coming months?
Scope, because there's so many things that the society is doing. There are projects in the Discovery Research Network. There's the virus registry. There's new educational resources, trying to have Congress. All of those things, they take staff time and they take resources, and trying to run an entire Congress. COVID, the What's Next conference was a kind of a test run. How do
Yeah.
we do that? We're still learning some lessons from that, but all the pieces of keeping members engaged, Congress does a lot of that, right? You can go and meet with people you haven't seen for the rest of the year, and it's tangible. Having a Zoom meeting or a webinar where you're not really in the same space, you don't have the bonding time, it's hard to keep people engaged. We've been very, very fortunate. We've had more people say, what can I do during this time, because they feel a need. Right? We'd love to export people to lots of different places. The Indian Health Service wants more people. New York needs people. Washington does. Texas needs lots of people. Texas always needs lots of people. There's just tremendous outpouring of volunteerism. And so that managing all of that with the existing staff, we could truly double the staff and still have more work than is comfortable. So I think
Sure.
scope is the biggest issue.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Um, let's see. I think we have a familiar person here, Greg Martin. We know him asking a question. Why is Dr. Kaplan wishing to hand over the presidential Twitter account? And especially just to kind of piggyback off that, I think maybe talking about scope and talking about new opportunities. How much of social media do you think will be utilized with forthcoming educational, opportunities and with Congress and that scenario?
Oh, I think that will absolutely be leveraged to great effect. It's comfortable, it's familiar, it's instantaneous. People would like it now, and they're going to get it right now. So I think social media is here to stay as an educational platform. Greg is absolutely savvy with social media. He loves it. Um,
He is, yes.
I know I'm a little bit older. I'm more of a face-to-face person, so I find that I don't like having to compress into a certain number of characters. As you can tell, I'm a talker. So
Sure,
I'll be
yeah,
happy to turn the
absolutely.
Twitter account to Greg.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that too. Yeah. We have another question. Let's see. How do we go about navigating the sea of data that's still coming out daily around COVID-19?
Oh dear Lord, I think this with some temperance, right? You would absolutely love to know right now what will work best. What can I use now for my patients? And yet, having some time, taking a step back, waiting for that to truly be published in a peer-reviewed fashion, as opposed to the press release, is what you need to do. And absolutely the time-honored principles of, was this a well-conducted study? Does it apply to my patients? Can I use that in my patient set? These are all still valid, and you need to apply all of those, because there will be new, shiny, bright things that are full of promise, and we like having things to do. We feel we feel as if we don't have the right tools. We still have nothing to directly deal with the virus, and we desperately want it. We want to take all of the hard work that you're doing within the ICU or the emergency department or rehab or the pre-hospital space and say, now I can get you to care because there is this thing or this bevy of things that we can use. We don't really have that. And so we are looking to be inspired. We are looking for hope. And yet, at the same time, have to ask, is that real? Will it do what I'd like it to do? Can I trust the data on which this is built? So
Yes, a
that's
little
the
bit of
hard part.
healthy skepticism. Yeah.
Many grains of salt.
Mm-hmm. Well, selfishly, I always like to ask, as a dietitian, I always like to ask a nutrition question. So, where are you seeing, are there any special things or differences about feeding these COVID patients than what we fed maybe an ARDS patient in the past? Are you guys doing anything differently or handling these patients as far as the nutrition is going?
We're not doing anything differently at the moment, mostly because I don't have data that should direct me to do it differently. Now, I will admit to a
Sure.
particular bias of mine. Since '97, I have taken all of my ICU patients, and everyone's had a normal dose of multivitamin and thiamine and folate and vitamin C, only 1,000 milligrams, not 6 grams. And if they were anemic and they had iron deficiency, they got some oral luminal iron. I didn't use much in the way of IV iron, but I did that for everyone. Now, most of my surgical patients have a wound to heal, so the vitamin C sort of made sense, and they're
Sure.
building new cells. So the rest of it seemed to be internally consistent. I don't know if that made any difference, but I've continued that as part of my practice. The rest of it, should we use an immune enhancing or modulating diet? I don't know. I think that there will be a host of studies that will come out from this. Paul Wishmeyer will probably be heading some of them. I suspect
Absolutely.
he's deeply invested in that space when he's not in the gym, and he's in the gym a lot. You can tell. So I benefit from guidance. There isn't anything new, I think, that has come out from Aspen, and if there is, please feel free to share it with all of us. You have all of our ears.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think that was all of our questions. And of course, you guys know we are on Twitter as well, so we can for sure continue the conversation there at our own pace. But Dr. Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us. This was excellent. We really appreciate the time.
No, it was my pleasure and a privilege, and thank you so much. And I even stayed on time.
Yes, we did. Wonderful. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you once again. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.